My straight roommate came to pick me up at midnight. Then he said something I never expected: gay love story. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you enjoy emotional gay love stories with romance, powerful twists, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing viewers from all over the world. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into today's story. Sometimes the longest goodbye begins years before anyone says a single word. If you had asked me what love looked like a week ago, I would have laughed, shrugged, and pointed across the room at my best friend while insisting that nothing complicated could ever happen between two people who had spent half their lives stealing each other's fries, arguing over movie endings, and finishing each other's sentences. That would have been the safe answer, the believable answer, the lie I had repeated so many times that I almost believed it myself. My name is Noah Walker, and for 12 years Lucas Bennett had been the center of almost every good memory I owned. We met during our first week of high school when I accidentally knocked over an entire tray of cafeteria food. While everyone else laughed, Lucas silently handed me his own lunch and said, "I guess we can both be hungry together." Somehow that ridiculous sentence became the beginning of everything. Years passed faster than either of us expected. High school became college. College became jobs. Birthdays blurred together with road trips, late-night diners, football games we barely watched, apartment hunting disasters, burnt Thanksgiving dinners, and countless Sunday afternoons spent doing absolutely nothing while pretending that doing nothing together somehow counted as an adventure. Lucas always had that effect on people. He could make ordinary moments feel like memories before they were even over. Everyone loved him. Neighbors remembered his name. Waitresses smiled when he walked into restaurants. Children waved at him in grocery stores for reasons none of us understood. He carried kindness the way some people carried confidence. Naturally, effortlessly. Meanwhile, I specialized in sarcasm, overthinking, and pretending everything was fine even when my own thoughts refused to cooperate. Somewhere between our sophomore year of college and our first real apartments, I realized my feelings had quietly crossed a line that friendship could never explain. I never planned for it to happen. There was no dramatic lightning strike or movie-worthy confession. It happened in tiny pieces. The way Lucas always noticed when I skipped breakfast. The way he remembered my coffee order without asking. The way he instinctively stepped closer whenever crowds became too loud because he knew I hated feeling trapped. None of those moments meant romance by themselves. Together, they became impossible to ignore. So I buried them. It seemed easier that way. Lucas talked about future vacations. I nodded. Lucas joked about eventually getting married one day. I smiled while pretending my stomach did not tighten. Lucas introduced me as his brother in everything except blood. I laughed because that was exactly what best friends were supposed to do. Then everything changed because of one phone call on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Lucas had accepted a physical therapy position nearly 1,000 miles away in Denver. Better salary, better opportunities, better future. I congratulated him immediately because that was what someone who truly loved another person should do. I even helped him pack boxes during the following week, carefully wrapping dishes while pretending every folded shirt was not another reminder that our daily lives were quietly coming apart. By the morning of his flight, the airport felt strangely smaller than usual, as though the walls themselves understood something neither of us wanted to admit. Lucas smiled for everyone else. He thanked his parents. He hugged his sister. He joked with the airline employee checking his suitcase. Then he turned toward me. "Come here," he said softly. I stepped forward expecting the same quick hug we had shared hundreds of times before. Instead, his arms tightened around me. Seconds passed, then more. People walked around us carrying backpacks and rolling suitcases while boarding announcements echoed overhead, yet Lucas never moved. His breathing slowed against my shoulder. His fingers gripped the back of my jacket just a little tighter. I waited for him to let go. He did not. And for the first time in 12 years, my best friend held on like saying goodbye was the one thing he simply could not make himself do. The boarding announcement finally echoed through the terminal for a second time, calm and cheerful in a way that felt almost insulting. Life was moving exactly as scheduled while mine had somehow stopped inside Lucas's arms. I could hear the quiet rhythm of his breathing, steady but strangely uneven, as if he were trying to memorize the moment instead of ending it. Around us, families reunited, Business travelers hurried towards security. Children laughed over oversized backpacks, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted through the bright terminal. The entire airport kept moving while neither of us did. "Lucas," I whispered with an awkward laugh that sounded far less convincing than I intended. "People are going to think we missed our flight." He let out a breath that almost became a laugh, but his arms remained exactly where they were. "I know," he answered quietly. "Just give me another second." Another second became several more. My heart refused to cooperate, pounding so loudly that I wondered if he could hear it through my jacket. Eventually, he stepped back just enough to look at me. His familiar blue eyes searched my face with an expression I had never seen before. It was not sadness exactly. It was something quieter, heavier, almost like regret wrapped inside uncertainty. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something important, then closed it again and smiled instead. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," I replied, immediately hating how ordinary those 3 words sounded after everything that had just happened. He picked up his duffel bag, waved one last time, and disappeared into the security line without looking back. I stood there long after he was gone, staring at the empty space where he had been standing only moments earlier. My phone vibrated before I even reached the parking garage. "Lucas, I already miss arguing with you about music." I smiled despite myself and typed back, "You always had terrible taste anyway." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Lucas, see? I missed this already." During the drive home, my phone buzzed twice more. Then again while I stopped for gas. Another message arrived before I finished putting groceries away that evening. Normally, Lucas and I texted every couple of days if life became busy. Now he somehow found a reason to message me every hour. The next morning, he sent me a picture of the sunrise outside his apartment in Denver. At lunch, he asked whether I had remembered to eat. Before dinner, he reminded me to water the little plant he had left behind because, according to him, it trusted only me now. By the end of the first week, we had talked every single night. Sometimes for 15 minutes. Sometimes for nearly 2 hours. We discussed work, weather, neighbors, sports, old memories, and absolutely nothing at all. Yet every conversation ended with an odd silence, as though neither of us wanted to be the first person to hang up. One Friday evening, my coworker Megan leaned against my desk with an amused smile after overhearing me laughing into my headset for the better part of an hour. "Long-distance relationship?" she teased. I nearly dropped my coffee. "No," I answered far too quickly. "It is just Lucas." She raised one eyebrow. "Your best friend?" "Yes." She smiled knowingly before walking away. "Well, whoever he is, I have never heard anyone sound that happy after talking to just a friend." Her words stayed with me long after she disappeared around the corner. That night, when Lucas called again, I answered before the first ring had even finished. Neither of us mentioned the airport. Neither of us mentioned the hug. But somewhere beneath every laugh, every joke, and every comfortable silence, it lingered between us like a question that neither one of us was brave enough to ask. By the second month, the miles between Boston and Denver had somehow made Lucas feel closer than he ever had when we lived 15 minutes apart. It did not make any sense, and that was exactly the problem. Every morning started with a message before my alarm finished ringing. Sometimes it was a picture of the mountains glowing beneath the sunrise. Sometimes it was a complaint about terrible office coffee. Sometimes it was nothing more than, "Did you remember breakfast?" I always answered, even when I told myself I should wait a little longer. Waiting never lasted more than 5 minutes. We had quietly become part of each other's routines without ever discussing it. My coworkers noticed long before I did. Megan walked into the break room one afternoon just as I caught myself smiling at my phone. She leaned against the counter with the expression of someone who had already solved a mystery. "Let me guess," she said. "Lucas again." I tried to sound casual. "He found a bakery that claims to make New England-style clam chowder." She laughed. "You are smiling like someone who just received a love letter, not a soup review." I rolled my eyes so dramatically that she nearly applauded. "He is my best friend." "Sure," she replied, reaching for the coffee pot. "And I am secretly training for the Olympics." Before I could defend myself, another coworker wandered in and asked, "Is that the friend who calls every night?" I blinked. "How do you know he calls every night?" "Because you leave the office at exactly 6 o'clock every evening with the biggest grin on your face." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Apparently, my schedule had become public knowledge without my permission. That evening, Lucas called while I was walking home through the neighborhood park. Children chased each other across the playground while a golden retriever insisted on greeting every stranger it passed. Lucas immediately noticed the background noise. "You took the long way home again," he said. "You always do that when you have had a stressful day." I stopped walking for a second. "How did you know?" He sounded genuinely confused. "Because I know you." For simple words. Nothing romantic. Nothing dramatic. Yet they settled somewhere deep inside my chest and refused to leave. A week later, Lucas mentioned that one of his co-workers wanted to introduce him to a woman who had recently joined the rehabilitation clinic. He laughed while telling the story, but something about his voice sounded forced, almost rehearsed. "She seems nice," he said. "Maybe I should finally start dating again." My smile disappeared before I could stop it. "You should," I answered, hoping my voice sounded more convincing than I felt. "She would be lucky to meet you." A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Lucas finally cleared his throat. "What about you? Anyone interesting in Boston?" I looked across the park as the evening breeze stirred the trees overhead. Not really. That was technically true. I had turned down 2 invitations for coffee during the past month without even thinking about them. Somehow, every conversation with someone new felt incomplete before it even started. Lucas laughed softly. "Good." The word slipped out so naturally that I almost thought I imagined it. A second later, he corrected himself. "I mean, good that nobody is wasting your time." I frowned. "Lucas." "Never mind," he said quickly. "Forget I said anything." But I could not forget it. Neither could he. For the rest of the call, our jokes came a little slower. Our pauses lasted a little longer. And beneath every ordinary sentence lingered the unmistakable feeling that both of us had begun circling the same truth while pretending not to see it. Autumn arrived, almost unnoticed. The maple trees outside my apartment traded their summer green for deep shades of gold and crimson, and the crisp morning air carried the kind of quiet that made every empty sidewalk feel larger than it really was. Lucas had now been in Denver for nearly 3 months, yet somehow his absence had become a constant presence. Every coffee shop reminded me of the ridiculous caramel drink he insisted was better than plain black coffee. Every grocery store made me glance toward the cereal aisle because he always spent 10 minutes comparing nutrition labels before buying the exact same box every week. I used to think missing someone faded with time. Instead, it seemed to grow roots. Lucas sounded different too. Not unhappy, just thoughtful. During our nightly calls, he often paused in the middle of sentences, as though another conversation was happening somewhere inside his head. One Thursday evening, he called much later than usual. His voice carried the tired warmth of someone who had spent the entire day helping other people before remembering to take care of himself. "Long day?" I asked. "Very," he admitted with a quiet laugh. "One of my patients finally walked without assistance today. Seeing that reminded me why I moved here." "I am proud of you," I said honestly. The line fell silent for a heartbeat. "You always say exactly what I need to hear." I smiled to myself while staring through my apartment window at the streetlights flickering on one by one. "That is because I have had 12 years of practice." He laughed, but there was something fragile underneath it. "Noah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Another pause. "Do you think people can spend years misunderstanding themselves?" I frowned. "About what?" He exhaled slowly. "Anything, I guess." I searched for the right answer instead of the easy one. I think people sometimes become so comfortable with who they believe they are that they stop asking whether it is still true. Lucas did not respond immediately. I could hear traffic somewhere outside his apartment and the distant hum of a passing train. That is surprisingly deep for someone who still burns grilled cheese sandwiches. That happened 1 time. 3 times. The pan was defective. His laughter returned, brighter this time, but the question lingered long after the joke faded. The following weekend, Megan convinced me to attend a neighborhood charity festival instead of hiding at home with takeout and old movies. Live music filled the park while local artists displayed paintings beneath white tents. Families wandered between food trucks, and children chased colorful balloons through the afternoon sunlight. It should have been the perfect distraction. Instead, every interesting moment became another thing I wanted to tell Lucas later that night. Megan caught me taking a picture of a golden retriever wearing a tiny red bandana. She folded her arms and smiled knowingly. "That photo is not for you. It is funny." It is for Lucas. I looked down at my phone, realizing she was absolutely right. She softened her voice. Noah, can I ask you something without you getting defensive? Probably not. Humor me anyway. I sighed dramatically. Fine. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. When you imagine your future, is your best friend always standing somewhere in it? I answered far too quickly. Yes. She nodded gently. Then maybe you already know why saying goodbye at that airport felt so impossible. That evening I sent Lucas the picture of the cheerful dog. He replied almost instantly with 3 laughing emojis followed by a simple sentence. I wish you were here so we could laugh at this together. My fingers hovered above the keyboard longer than usual. Before I could decide what to write, another message appeared. Actually, I think I wish you were here for a lot more than that. I read the sentence once, then twice, then a third time. The blinking cursor waited beneath my untouched reply, while my heartbeat quietly reminded me that some moments change everything before a single answer is ever written. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like an hour, even though only a few seconds had passed. Lucas's message glowed beneath my reflection like it had quietly rewritten the entire evening. Actually, I think I wish you were here for a lot more than that. There were 100 possible meanings hiding inside one simple sentence, and my overactive imagination eagerly collected every single one. He could have meant friendship. He could have meant familiarity. He could have meant missing home. Or maybe, just maybe, he had finally begun asking himself the same impossible questions that had kept me awake for years. I locked my phone without replying. Not because I wanted to ignore him, but because I was suddenly afraid that one honest sentence from either of us might change everything forever. Sleep refused to arrive that night. Every memory replayed itself with new meaning. The airport hug, the endless phone calls, the strange pauses, his quiet, good, when I admitted nobody else was in my life. The question about people misunderstanding themselves. None of those moments had seemed connected before. Now they formed a trail that led somewhere I had never allowed myself to follow. The next morning my phone buzzed before sunrise. Lucas had sent nothing except a picture of the mountains outside his apartment wrapped in fresh snow. A minute later another message appeared. Sorry if what I said last night sounded strange. I smiled sadly. Of course he was nervous too. I typed, erased, typed again, then finally settled on something safe. It did not sound strange. It sounded honest. His reply arrived almost immediately. Can we talk tonight? Of course, I answered, wondering why my heartbeat suddenly felt louder than the traffic outside my window. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles away, Lucas tried convincing himself that life was perfectly normal. He accepted an invitation to dinner from the coworker everyone insisted he should get to know better. Emily was kind, funny, intelligent, and easy to talk to. She laughed at his jokes. She asked thoughtful questions about his patience. She even shared his love for hiking. By every reasonable standard, the evening should have been a success. Yet every funny story reminded him of someone else who would have laughed harder. Every comfortable silence felt incomplete because another familiar voice was missing. When Emily smiled across the restaurant table and asked whether he had ever been in love, Lucas hesitated just long enough to surprise himself. I honestly do not know, he admitted. She studied him for a moment before offering a gentle smile. Sometimes the answer is not hiding in the future. Sometimes it has been standing beside you for years. Lucas laughed softly, but the words followed him all the way home. That evening our video call connected exactly at 7 o'clock. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We simply looked at each other through 2 glowing screens separated by nearly 1,000 miles. Lucas looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. He rubbed the back of his neck before finally breaking the silence. I had dinner with someone tonight. I forced a smile that felt painfully fragile. How did it go? He looked away from the camera. She was wonderful. I nodded slowly, already preparing myself to sound supportive. Then he sighed. The entire time I kept wondering what joke you would have made about the menu. I blinked. Lucas gave a quiet, defeated laugh. I think something is wrong with me, Noah. I keep trying to move forward, but every road somehow circles back to you. Neither of us laughed this time. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was honest. And for the first time since that impossible goodbye at the airport, neither of us tried to pretend that we did not already know where our hearts had been waiting all along. Lucas's confession lingered in the silence between us long after the call ended. I sat motionless on my couch, the city lights glowing beyond my apartment window, while my phone rested in my hand like it suddenly weighed twice as much. For years I had imagined hearing words that might finally explain everything I had hidden inside my heart. Yet when the moment arrived, it felt less like fireworks and more like standing quietly at the edge of a life that could change forever with a single step. I replayed his voice again and again. Every road somehow circles back to you. Those words were not polished or rehearsed. They sounded frightened, honest, human. The following morning I expected another cheerful message about coffee or the weather. Instead, my phone remained silent. An hour passed, then another. By lunchtime I finally received a short text. Busy day? Talk tonight. It should have felt normal. Instead, the distance between those three simple words made me realize how much our daily conversations had become the rhythm of my life. That evening Lucas looked exhausted when the video call connected. His apartment lights were dim, and unopened moving boxes still lined one wall, silent reminders that he had never truly settled into his new home. He rubbed his eyes before smiling weakly. I have been thinking all day. I laughed softly. That sounds dangerous. It probably is. He leaned back in his chair and looked directly into the camera. After our conversation yesterday, I kept asking myself why I have been so afraid. I stayed quiet. He deserved the space to find his own answer. I spent my whole life believing I already understood myself, he continued. I thought love was supposed to look one certain way because that was the only story I ever imagined for myself. Then I moved away, and somehow every ordinary day kept reminding me of you. Every accomplishment felt incomplete. Every funny story was one I wanted to tell you first. Every place I visited made me wish you had been standing beside me. He paused, taking a slow breath. I finally realized I was not missing my hometown. I was missing the person who always made every place feel like home. My chest tightened. I wanted to answer immediately, but years of protecting my own heart had made honesty feel strangely unfamiliar. Before I could speak, Lucas smiled with quiet determination. I requested vacation time this morning. I blinked. Vacation? 3 days. He nodded. I booked the earliest flight I could find. My heart skipped. Lucas, he laughed nervously. Do not panic. I am not expecting anything from you. I just realized there are some conversations that should never happen through a phone screen. I looked down for a second, trying to steady the emotions that suddenly threatened to spill over. When I looked back up, he was still watching me with the same gentle patience he had shown me since the day we first met in a crowded high school cafeteria. There is something I need to tell you in person, he said quietly. This time I did not hide behind careful words or nervous jokes. I smiled with more relief than I had felt in years. Then I will meet you at the airport. Lucas's shoulders relaxed as though he had been carrying an invisible weight for months. Good, he whispered. Because this time, I do not want our goodbye to be the last thing we remember. After the call ended, I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where an old photo album rested on the highest shelf. Inside were 12 years of birthdays, road trips, holidays, and ordinary afternoons that had quietly become the foundation of everything we were. I closed the album with a smile, realizing that for the first time in a very long while, I was no longer looking backward. I was counting the hours until the future finally arrived. The airport looked exactly the same as it had 3 months earlier, yet everything inside me felt completely different. Travelers hurried beneath glowing departure boards, rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors, and the familiar aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the terminal. Life continued with the same steady rhythm, but this time I was not standing there to say goodbye. I was waiting for someone who had crossed nearly 1,000 miles because silence had finally become harder than honesty. My phone buzzed. Lucas, just landed. I looked up almost immediately, my heartbeat racing far ahead of common sense. Passengers began pouring through the arrival corridor in small waves. Business travelers checked emails before reaching baggage claim. Families reunited with relieved laughter. Children sprinted toward waiting grandparents. Then I saw him. Lucas stood near the sliding doors with a backpack over one shoulder, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. For a brief second, neither of us moved. The distance between us was no more than 30 feet, yet it felt like the longest stretch of our entire friendship. Then Lucas smiled. Not the easy smile he gave strangers. not the playful grin that usually appeared before one of his terrible jokes. This smile carried relief, nervousness, and hope all at once. I found myself walking first. He did the same. By the time we reached each other, words had completely abandoned us. Lucas laughed softly, shaking his head as though he could not believe we had made something so simple feel so difficult. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there for another quiet moment before he opened his arms slightly, giving me every opportunity to step away if I wanted. Instead, I closed the distance without hesitation. The hug felt different from the one at the airport months earlier. There was no fear of running out of time, no desperate attempt to freeze a final memory. It was calm, familiar, safe. When we finally stepped back, Lucas looked almost embarrassed by the emotion in his own expression. "I practiced this conversation on the flight," he admitted. "About 50 times. Did any of the practice versions go well?" I asked with a small smile. "Not even a little." We laughed together, and the tension eased just enough for us to breathe again. We spent the afternoon wandering through the city without any real destination. We stopped at the diner where we had celebrated college graduation years before. The waitress recognized us immediately and joked that it had been too long since the troublemakers returned. We visited the Riverside Park where we once spent an entire afternoon arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Every familiar place seemed to remind us that the strongest parts of our friendship had always been built inside ordinary moments. As evenings settled over the city, we found ourselves sitting on a quiet bench overlooking the river. The water reflected thousands of tiny lights from the buildings across the shore, shimmering beneath the cool autumn sky. Lucas rested his hands together, staring at the gentle current before finally speaking. "I have been afraid of saying this because I thought it might cost me the most important person in my life." I listened without interrupting. "When I moved to Denver, I kept telling myself I only missed my best friend. Then every single day proved that explanation was too small." He turned toward me, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "I do not know exactly when my feelings changed, Noah. Maybe they changed years ago, and I was simply too scared to notice. Maybe they were growing quietly while I was busy giving them another name. But I know this much." He took one slow breath. "I do not want a future where you are just someone I call at the end of the day. I want a future where I come home and you are already there." The evening air fell completely still. For the first time in 12 years, there was nothing left to misunderstand. Only two hearts that had spent far too long waiting for the same moment to finally arrive. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The river continued its quiet journey beneath the bridge, carrying shimmering reflections across the dark water as though the entire city had decided to slow down with us. I looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and realized nothing about the person sitting beside me had changed. He still brushed his thumb against the edge of a coffee cup whenever he was nervous. He still tilted his head slightly while waiting for an answer. He was still the same man who had shared his lunch with a clumsy freshman 12 years earlier. The only thing that had changed was that we had finally stopped hiding behind the safest version of the truth. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. "Do you remember what you told me the first day we met?" I asked quietly. Lucas blinked, then laughed under his breath. "I barely remember what I had for breakfast. You said we could both be hungry together." He covered his face with one hand, clearly embarrassed. "That was not exactly my most impressive line." "Maybe not," I admitted with a grin. "But it kept you in my life." His expression softened immediately. I guess it did. I took a slow breath, feeling years of carefully guarded emotions settle into something unexpectedly peaceful. "You asked for honesty." He nodded. "So here it is. I stopped seeing you as just my best friend a long time ago. I never told you because I thought keeping you in my life as a friend was better than risking losing you completely." Lucas closed his eyes for a brief second before letting out a quiet laugh filled with relief. "Do you know how many times I almost called you after moving to Denver just to ask whether I was losing my mind? Probably the same number of times I almost admitted how I felt." We both laughed, and somehow the years of uncertainty became lighter. There was no dramatic moment, no impossible coincidence, just two people finally speaking with the honesty they had owed each other for a very long time. Lucas looked toward the river again before asking the question that mattered most. "Can we take this slowly?" I answered without hesitation. "I do not want to skip anything." He smiled. "Neither do I." We spent the rest of the evening walking through familiar streets with a new understanding that somehow made everything feel both different and wonderfully familiar. We talked about practical things instead of impossible fantasies. Lucas admitted he could request a transfer back to Boston after completing his first year if the right position became available. I confessed that my company had recently expanded into Colorado and remote work was becoming more common. Neither of us promised to rearrange an entire life overnight. Instead, we promised something much simpler. We would make every important decision together. The next morning, Lucas met my parents for breakfast before his flight home. My mother noticed the easy smiles between us almost immediately. She simply reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "It is nice to see both of you looking so peaceful." Lucas's father called while we were driving to the airport, asking whether the visit had been worthwhile. Lucas glanced at me before answering with quiet confidence. "It was the most important trip I have ever taken." When we reached the departure terminal, we stood facing each other in the same place where months earlier uncertainty had wrapped itself around an unfinished goodbye. This time there were no unanswered questions left between us. Lucas hugged me gently, and I returned the embrace with the calm certainty that comes from finally standing exactly where you belong. As he stepped toward the security line, he turned back with a smile that reached his eyes. "I will call you tonight." I smiled just as easily. "I know you will." For the first time since he moved away, watching him disappear into the crowd no longer felt like losing someone. It felt like waiting for the next chapter we had finally chosen to write together. 1 year later, the first snow of December drifted quietly across Boston, settling on sidewalks, rooftops, and the familiar little neighborhood where life had somehow come full circle. Some mornings I still caught myself expecting everything to disappear like an unusually beautiful dream. Then I would hear Lucas humming softly in the kitchen while making coffee, and reality would gently remind me that the happiest changes often arrived one honest conversation at a time. His transfer request had been approved 6 months earlier, something neither of us had celebrated with dramatic speeches or impossible promises. We celebrated the way we always had. We ordered too much pizza, argued about which movie to watch, and laughed until the neighbors probably questioned our sanity. It felt wonderfully ordinary. That was the surprising part. Loving Lucas never turned our lives into a perfect fairy tale. We still forgot grocery lists. We still debated whether the thermostat was set too high or too low. He still insisted that my grilled cheese technique was a public safety concern, and I still reminded him that his taste in coffee belonged in a dessert shop instead of a kitchen. The difference was that every ordinary moment now carried a quiet certainty neither of us had ever known before. One Saturday afternoon, we met Megan for lunch at the same diner where she had once teased me about smiling at my phone. The moment Lucas stepped away to refill our drinks, she leaned across the table with the triumphant expression of someone who had patiently waited an entire year to be proven right. "So," she whispered, "about that best friend." I laughed before she even finished. "You are never going to let that go, are you?" "Absolutely not." She smiled warmly. "I have never seen you this happy." I looked toward the counter where Lucas was somehow making the elderly cashier laugh while balancing 3 cups of coffee. "Neither have I admitted. On our way home, we stopped at the small park where countless evening phone calls had once ended while I walked alone beneath autumn trees. Children were building snowmen beside the walking path, their laughter floating through the crisp afternoon air. Lucas slipped his hand into mine with the easy confidence that only grows after choosing each other day after day. There was no audience to impress, no explanation to offer, just 2 people enjoying a quiet winter afternoon together. "Do you ever think about that day at the airport?" he asked. I smiled immediately because I knew exactly which one he meant, more often than I probably should. He laughed softly. I almost let go. I turned toward him. "But you did not." He nodded. Something inside me knew that if I walked away without holding on just a little longer, I would spend the rest of my life wondering why. I squeezed his hand gently. "I am glad you listened." We continued walking until we reached a bench overlooking the frozen pond. The peaceful silence between us no longer needed to be filled with nervous jokes or careful guesses. It was the comfortable silence built by trust, patience, and thousands of ordinary moments shared together. Lucas wrapped one arm around my shoulders exactly as naturally as he had once offered me half of his lunch all those years ago. I rested my head lightly against him, and watched snowflakes drift across the quiet water. After a quiet moment, Lucas tilted his head toward me with the same gentle smile that had carried us through so many ordinary days. "There is one thing I have wanted to do ever since that first airport goodbye," he said softly. Before I could ask what he meant, he lifted one hand to my cheek and waited just long enough for me to meet his eyes. I smiled instead of answering with words. The distance between us disappeared as naturally as every step that had brought us here, and he kissed me with quiet tenderness beneath the falling snow. It was not dramatic or hurried. It was simply honest, carrying every unspoken feeling we had spent years learning to understand. When we finally pulled back, we both laughed softly, almost surprised that something we had once feared could feel so wonderfully natural. Lucas rested his forehead lightly against mine. "I should have done that a long time ago," he whispered. "We both arrived exactly when we were ready," I replied. He smiled, took my hand again, and together we watched the snow continue to fall over the frozen pond. Sometimes people spend years searching for the place where they truly belong, never realizing that home is not always a city, a house, or a destination on a map. Sometimes home is simply the person who stays, who listens, who chooses you even after every fear has been spoken aloud. Looking back, I realized the most important moment of our story had never been the day Lucas confessed his feelings or the day we finally called each other more than best friends. It was the moment he refused to let go when the world expected him to walk away. That first embrace gave us the courage to keep choosing each other, and the quiet kiss beneath the falling snow became a promise that we would never have to hide our hearts again. Every morning since then had gently reminded me that the best journeys do not always start with taking a step forward. Sometimes they begin with someone choosing to hold on just a little longer, and sometimes they find their happiest ending with the simplest kiss shared between two people who finally made it home.